People look for the shortcuts to making wealth. People are always like, when is the best time to trade? Oh yeah, but like maybe this other coin that I heard about is also great and maybe I should buy that. And then it's like, you're not going to survive in Bitcoin, or you're not going to make any money in Bitcoin unless you truly understand what you own. You know, there's no shortcuts. You have to be willing to educate yourself. You have to be willing to study it and put in the work. Something I truly own is incredibly rare, but it does come with a lot of responsibility. It does come with technical challenges. Not your keys, not your coins. I just hope that as we scale Bitcoin and as more people get onboarded, it's done in the right way, where people are able to take control of their keys, whether that's through a collaborative custody model or whatever it may be. You're already kind of in the future, but you're still stuck in the traditional world. And right now it's like, how do you balance those two things? And how do you make sure that you can successfully live in both? But the real priority, at least for me, is how do I get that Bitcoin number to be higher at the end of the year?
You had me actually on before on your show. It's rare that someone has me on before and then I invite them back. Usually it's the other way around. Usually I'm the faster one in inviting people.
Yeah, I was gonna say myself. It's interesting sitting on the other side of the podcast this time. So yeah, excited to dive into it and to be on your show.
Really cool. What just for people to get to know, like how many. The podcast is recently started, right? How did you go about that? Why did you start it, and how many episodes and stuff like that?
Yeah, so I started the podcast, or the podcast really was an idea that came to me last year in April, let's say. So I have a bit of a background with podcasting in general, actually, in about like 2019. It was 2019, or no, actually 2018. I started a different podcast. This was before I was a Bitcoiner, but it was a podcast, also an interview-based podcast, because I was very, I would say I was actually pretty early into podcasting, not as a podcaster myself, but as a listener. I remember very, very early on being a huge fan of like the Tim Ferriss show, and that's really what got me into the podcasting world. And then in 2018, I started my own show called the Need to Know Podcast. It's still actually on Spotify. But that was more just like an interview podcast where I was interviewing people from a bunch of different disciplines and mainly just trying to distill, you know, a bit in the form of Tim Ferriss, just talk about their habits, routines, mindsets of successful people and how they got to where they have gotten. And then in I believe it was about 2022, I started a podcast called Bitcoin Blueprint, and that's also still on. But the idea of that one was to just be an informational podcast. So it was really just explaining like fundamental concepts of Bitcoin, more from an educational standpoint. So things like, what is Bitcoin? Why is it important? What are hardware wallets? How do those work? What is a lot of fundamental concepts in Bitcoin that are hard to understand. I basically made a series of episodes to distill those concepts into 20, 30-minute episodes and explain it to people in an easy way. And once I felt like I was it was meant to be more of a series, not more so like an ongoing podcast. And then in April, because I really wanted to continue podcasting and I really wanted to talk with Bitcoiners, the idea of the Bitcoin Journeys podcast came about, which is what I'm doing now. And my show is where I interview Bitcoiners like yourself, talk a bit about their journey, so how they got into the Bitcoin, how they see their value proposition, and all of that. And I think right now, if I'm not mistaken, I'm at about 22-ish episodes, trying to release one every week. And it's been an incredible journey so far.
Interesting. I love that. And your Bitcoin journeys is like having conversation, but also discussing the path that Bitcoiners go through. What are maybe some of the patterns that you already saw when you talk with so many Bitcoiners in their orange pilling journeys, in their Bitcoin journey? What kind of changed in their lives, and what you kind of conclude from that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure like yourself, I think one of the biggest things or probably the biggest key that I see amongst all Bitcoiners is they're incredibly smart people who have taken the time to fundamentally study Bitcoin, understand what it is, understand how it plays into the bigger picture. And because I interview Bitcoiners, right? And typically Bitcoiners are people who are very convicted on Bitcoin, what it is, the future, the value proposition. And for everybody to get there, I think education is such an important part. And so that's one of the biggest things that I've noticed in interviewing these people is how incredibly smart they are, not only about Bitcoin, but about a variety of other topics, whether that's economic history, history in general, technology. And it's incredibly inspiring because you learn from them and we learn from each other. And I think the education point has been such a huge thing. And then another thing which I've really noticed as well is critical thinking and being able to think on your own. I think as Bitcoiners, especially now more and more it's getting mainstream, but a lot of the people that I've had on my show have been Bitcoiners who have been in the space for quite some time. And so before Bitcoin was where it is now, and even now it's mainly not as mainstream as it will be eventually, it really requires you to think out of the box, to think out of the traditional financial system that we're in and how Bitcoin really works. And you have to be able to apply critical thinking. You have to be able to kind of step away from the herd, really analyze how the system works. And obviously, I think books like the Bitcoin Standard, the Fiat Standard, Broken Money, those are all really good books to help you kind of step out of the system. But you do have to have that initial character trait, I think, which is critical thinking and really being able to step out of the box. So yeah, lots of traits. I could probably keep going on, but I think those are some of the main ones that I've noticed so far.
Do you think that has something to do with Bitcoin, or is it just because we are early in a revolution?
I think a bit of both. I think, in any revolution, you have early adopters and people who are able to see the future a bit. I know we talk about Michael Saylor a lot in this space, but he's someone who's a prime example of that, because not only has he been able to do it in Bitcoin, but he's also able to do it earlier, right? He had the whole book on the mobile wave and predicting things like the coming of Apple and Google and Amazon and how big those companies would be in the future. And I think it's part of being a Bitcoiner, but it's also part of being as you are. You have people who are naturally able to see emerging technologies. And I think also what's important is to be able to filter, okay, filter the signal from the noise. What is actually something that will go towards the future, and what is something that will probably over the course of the year, whether it's a fad, we've seen in the past things in even the crypto world that have really been more fads than actual things that are sticking along. And so I think it's a bit of both. I think it's a bit of Bitcoin is a unique case, but also people inherently like Michael Saylor who have that ability to really think critically and towards the future.
Love that. That's really cool. Yeah, it is also when you see all the things that are happening in Bitcoin, and when you see the people that are involved in Bitcoin, it's kind of hard to not get excited about it. It's like you see so many smart people to work on basically one big project, and this is kind of revolutionizing the whole financial space. It really makes you extremely excited and bullish on the future. What is inside, like as a Bitcoin podcast host, you can probably relate to that a lot. There's a lot of topics inside of Bitcoin, and it's so deep and so broad already. What is kind of the thing that excites you the most within Bitcoin?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think, to be honest, what's at the top of my mind right now is more from a usability standpoint, because I think, like the fundamental technology, Bitcoin, right? It was when Satoshi created it, it was for the most part set in stone, and how it works and the fundamental principles underlying it. But I think where it's lacking right now is how do we make it more accessible to the masses and more usable to the masses? Because I know, like myself, like yourself, like a lot of early Bitcoiners, we've gotten into it and we've taken the time to learn about things like hardware wallets, multi-signature custody, collaborative custody, all those things. And they're great solutions if you're technically knowledgeable about those things. And, we have services like Casa, Unchained. I recently had an interview with the founder of 21st Capital, who also do collaborative custody. And so there's more and more solutions that are coming to the market that are making it more usable. But what I really want to see is even beyond that, because I struggle with it where it's like, I like the idea of collaborative custody as a Bitcoiner, but because I'm comfortable with the idea, because I know how it works, I still see that there's a big divide between myself and my knowledge and the average person, right? And the idea is that we want to onboard the next billion Bitcoiners. And so really what's top of mind is thinking about how we're going to do that. And you have things like, I know Fedimint that people are working on, or whether it be more easy to use hardware wallets. Like, for example, I'm a big fan of the BitKey, Jack Dorsey's company, who just came out with a really great hardware wallet. But really what I'm focused on, and to answer your question, is how do we improve the usability of Bitcoin so that we can really scale it to the masses without everybody having an ETF and just having exposure to the price of Bitcoin, but actually taking the self-custody aspect and making it applicable to, as many people as possible.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's like you want to make it really accessible. And I was in Abu Dhabi and I interviewed on stage I forgot her name. Oh God, that's so embarrassing. I forget names too quick. But I actually interviewed someone from BitKey on stage about BitKey in Abu Dhabi, and she just gave me a BitKey there, and I was like, "Hey, let me know what you think." And I tinkered around with it a little bit, and I was like, "That's such a great solution, especially for people that already are used to the iPhone and really easy to use things." You just can do. Obviously, it has its downsides and risk and disadvantages and advantages. I personally don't use it, but I think for someone to have a multi-signature solutions with the Bitcoin, with the server key and their phone key they have, I think it's a really nice solution if you are getting started in Bitcoin. Before you keep it on exchange, just keep it on an easy solution like that. That's really great. I wouldn't park 100 Bitcoin on there, but maybe for your first few $100s in Bitcoin, why not? Or first thousands even.
Yeah, I mean, I think because for me, so since I've been in Bitcoin, I've been very luckily when I got into Bitcoin, I was very quickly exposed to people like Andreas Antonopoulos, who really stressed the emphasis of not your keys, not your coins. And so I've really been, for the past 5 years, experimenting with probably every single hardware wallet there is, and that's from single signature providers such as Cold Card, Foundation. You have obviously the popular ones in Ledger and Trezor. To multi-sig solutions like Casa, like Unchained, like 21st Capital. But for me, I like those solutions, but there was always something in the back of my mind where even with the multi-signature solutions, you're still fully responsible for anything that happens, right? And luckily, I haven't lost any Bitcoin. But still, it's something that sometimes keeps me up at night. I'm analyzing, where are all my seed phrases? Where am I keeping my wallets? How do I make sure that it's dispersed in a way that's, that there's no single points of failure? And so it does take a lot of analyzing and a lot of brain work and a lot of diligence as well, because it can be easy to mess something up. And, that when you have your funds on a hardware wallet, and if you lose it, you're screwed basically. And so with the BitKey, and this isn't an advertisement for BitKey because I'm no way affiliated to them, but I do recognize that they really filled a good hole in the market, which is combining a hardware wallet that's super easy and intuitive to use with the iPhone's interface, and having a multi-signature solution as well wrapped into it, and making it nearly impossible to make a mistake. Now, obviously, there's downsides to it as well, but that's kind of the conversation that I think we should have more and more, is like, hardware wallets are great. They're amazing to be able to take full control and responsibility of your keys. But I think if we're being really brutally honest, for a lot of people, it's still very daunting. And so people don't make that step to do it because they don't want to take that responsibility. And so they end up leaving it on exchanges anyways, and then you're kind of back at square one. So I'm not saying the big key is the end all be all, but I do think that there is a big market for finding ways to combine the ease of use of self-custody with, combine the ease of use of having like your Bitcoin on an exchange with the security and the self-sovereignty of self-custody.
I always tell people, like, people don't have self-custody. We live in a total bubble. Almost all of my guests have self-custody. But funny enough, if I ask my Bitcoin community, most of them actually say they don't have self-custody. When I see in a conference and they ask on a main stage, or who has self-custody, and they're like 8,000 people, and like 20% lift their arms, and like the rest of them like, I don't want to tinker with self-custody. I'm like, it's not something that everyone does. It's something that actually almost nobody does. Like, self-custody is something that most people shy away from because of the stories, because they trust an exchange more than themselves, which is really sad. But it is a reality, and I think it's not because people are stupid. It's because we have to really develop those technologies in a better way to make it really safe, secure, and easy, so everyone understands what they're doing. And we still have some time to get there. We still have some developments and technological advancements to get there.
Yeah, no, I agree. And that's the thing. I think sometimes as Bitcoiners, especially people who have been in the space for a while, we assume that a lot of people are, self-custodying their Bitcoin. But I think there's more people than you would imagine that, like you said, you could be when your example of when you're at the conference, it's so far away. And I think that's the thing that we want to avoid with Bitcoin, is where we end up again in this cycle of people not really owning their Bitcoin, and then you get this rehypothecation scheme where then the people who do actually have custody of the Bitcoin end up rehypothecating it and lending it out, and then you have crashes like we saw obviously with FTX, where an exchange just goes belly up. And so it's really important, and I try to emphasize it to all my friends and family who get into Bitcoin, as well as like, truly, self-custody is a gift. Being able to just take your Bitcoin and take ownership of it and say, look, there's nobody who can tell me what to do with this. Like, it's mine. There's nobody that's going to say you can spend that, you can't spend that. It's something I truly own, is incredibly rare, but it does come with a lot of responsibility. It does come with technical challenges. And so I think, obviously, we're still in the very early days of Bitcoin. I think same thing with the internet. When it was first started, there was a lot of people who were spinning up their own servers and modems and everything. And so obviously the technology advances to a point where it becomes more usable as it scales to the masses. I just hope that as we scale Bitcoin and as more people get onboarded, it's done in the right way, where people are able to take control of their keys, whether that's through a collaborative custody model or whatever it may be, while still, being able to profit from Bitcoin and hold it and cherish in it. And so I think it'll be something that we'll see, I think, develop over the coming years. Also, as we see more things get adopted in terms of like payment mechanisms and the Lightning Network. And because right now also Bitcoin is not very spendable. Obviously, there's tax implications that come along with that as well, but it's still a clunky infrastructure. And I think that's why it's something that I'm, at top of my mind, especially as someone who lives a majority on a Bitcoin standard. You start to think about it more, because it starts to become more and more practical in your day-to-day, right?
Is that the thing that kind of holds Bitcoin still back from like mass adoption?
Yeah. Yes and no. I think no, because I think right now, the thing with Bitcoin is we're in more the monetization phase, where even though there are people who live on a Bitcoin standard, typically people don't want to spend Bitcoin because they know the value of it and what it will be going forward, which is good because it allows you to live a bit more, fiscally responsible, or in Seyfried's, words, have a higher time preference, because it's something that you don't want to spend. So you really think about, okay, do I want to buy this, or is it a want, or is it a need? So I think in terms of long-term adoption, usability right now is maybe not as relevant because people typically just want to buy and hold Bitcoin. They don't really right now use it as much in day-to-day transactions. But I think as we scale and as Bitcoin gets to a point where maybe it goes higher and higher in the monetization phase and it does get to become more and more stable, that will be a big issue. But right now, I think the biggest thing in terms of adoption, and that's why I think your podcast is so important, my podcast is so important, all Bitcoin podcasts are so important, is education. People still fundamentally, a lot of people still don't understand what Bitcoin is and why it's important. So I think education is probably the biggest stumbling block towards adoption right now. And then I think usability is something that is close second.
I partnered up with Coin Vigilante. This is the most beautiful Bitcoin timepiece that I ever saw created by anyone. Look at that beauty. I love it so much. Coin Vigilante made a perfect Bitcoin watch. That's the perfect, subtle, elegant way to go out there and show that you are a Bitcoiner. And that watch brand is Bitcoin only. And Coin Vigilante just dropped a completely new and amazing Genesis edition of their watch collections. You have the date of the first ever mined Bitcoin block in there, and of course also the block height and which epoch we are currently in. I love the level of detail they put in this masterpiece, and make sure to check out those amazing Coin Vigilante timepieces down in the descriptions. I love those watches so much. If you watch or listen to my podcast on a regular basis, I guess you already bought some Bitcoin. And now the most important step is to keep the Bitcoin. Keep them secure in a hardware wallet. My personal recommendation for hardware wallet is the BitBox. It's super secure. It's simple to set up. It's also a perfect gift for a friend who has still their Bitcoin on an exchange. And you can get a 5% discount with the code Robin at the checkout. Visit bitbox.swiss/Robin to get your BitBox. And the next step is to really level up your sovereignty as an individual. You have to have the most secure self-custody setup. You have to secure your own devices. You have to protect your privacy. You have to set up an inheritance plan. And depending on where you live, you even want to have a plan B, a citizenship where you can move in case something goes really wrong. And through all those steps, the Bitcoin way is guiding you through step by step. And if you visit thebitcoinway.com/partners/Robin, you even get a 30-minute free call to find out how you can level up your sovereignty.
I often think about what drives, what is the main thing that drives Bitcoin adoption, and I still feel like it's the price. Like I still feel like the price is not the lagging indicator on the consequence of adoption. It's more of the cause almost of adoption. Like people adopting it, the price goes up. That brings more people in, which forces more adoption, which brings more people in, which brings more adoption, which brings more developments, more money, more companies that develop stuff, and all those things like in an upward cycle. So I do feel like price is the major marketing aspect that drives all the things, and the YouTube channels, the education are downstream from that, I guess.
Yeah, no, definitely. Because I mean, we also notice it in the cycles, right? Like now we're entering another bull run, or we are in another bull run, and obviously all attention for Bitcoin is up as well. I firsthand experienced this as well in the last cycle, because I actually worked for Strike for a bit, Jack Muller's company, before the last bear market, and obviously at the time, the company was hiring a lot of people. And in the downturn, the companies are affected. People have to be let go, and it's the same thing in media. Like Bitcoin, at least right now, it's very cyclical. So when it's good, it's good, and when it's bad, it can be very bad. So I think hopefully we'll start to see a bit, diminishing effects of those cycles. Like I think in terms of volatility, as Bitcoin becomes more and more like a mainstay of the financial system. But right now, like you said, it is very cyclical. It is very, when the price runs up, it's the biggest marketing thing there is, because then people get interested, people want to buy it. But as soon as there is a crash, as soon as the Bitcoin price goes down, and especially as we experienced in the last market, I think the bull run of 2019, 2020, 2021 was my first true bull run. And I remember, at the time, at the heights of the bull run, people were saying, it's going up to 300, 400K even. And, I think we hit a high of about 69K and then crashed down into the teens again. And yeah, it's crazy, right? You go from this euphoria of thinking that you're about to be filthy rich, so to speak, to then, being back almost lower to where you were in the previous cycle. So Bitcoin has a beautiful way of humbling you, of really making sure that you have conviction and that you understand what it is that you're holding. Right, like you said, right now it is very cyclical, unfortunately. But I hope that over time it becomes less and less cyclical and it becomes more a part of just mainstream financial system.
Do you think volatility actually goes down? Like I have a hard time believing that for some reason.
I don't know. It's so hard to predict anything with Bitcoin. I hope it does. I don't think it will be in the next few years that volatility goes down. I do hope that volatility decreases. I think it'll still be peaks and valleys, but I hope that the drawdowns won't be 80% drawdowns. I hope maybe it'll be 30, 40%, which is still quite significant if you're just thinking of financial assets. But I think volatility will remain a part of Bitcoin. And I do think it's a feature, not a bug at the moment, until it becomes really globally adopted. And at that point, I think the monetization will be so high and it'll be so stable that, I think it's Preston Fish who also has this theory that once Bitcoin essentially is fully monetized, we'll see Bitcoin being reallocated into other assets like real estate, the stock market again, but priced at a reasonable level and not, where things are today. But I don't think we'll see that happening. Who knows, right? But I don't think we'll see that happening anytime soon.
I just want to pull that up if I find it, and that's like, oh, I found it actually. Wow, I'm amazed that I actually found it, because usually I don't find those charts. I'm getting more better in being my own Jamie.
I was gonna say
that pulls things up while still being the host, because I think Bitcoin is going to be adopted really crazy, and the steepest curve of the adoption, I think, in Bitcoin is still in front of us. And I'm really curious on what you think about that. And when you compare that now, the gold price in Weimar marks and the percentage change in the gold price, in that case, I think gold price will be Bitcoin and Weimar will be like the strongest fiat currencies, and all others will be even worse than that. And I think the adoption curve probably looks more like that, and less diminishing. Like people are thinking like, oh, like we every year now a little bit less less returns of Bitcoin, still really strong, and volatility also a little bit less. I get that. But I that's why I asked, like, I have a hard time believing the lower volatility, because of a hard time believing the lower diminishing returns, like the diminishing returns theory. And I think Bitcoin adoption will more look like something like that for the people that only listen now. It's a chart where the gold price is in Weimar marks from 1914 to 1924 on the screen, and it basically shows a very flat curve, and then to the end it goes really high up, and the higher it goes up, the higher the volatility. And that's why I think we are probably somewhere here between 1917 and 1920, and I think the volatility and the returns actually will increase, but I could be wrong. I'm just like curious on what you think around that theory.
Yeah, well, what's interesting about this chart as well is I think you can, yeah, because this chart gets pulled up a lot in Bitcoin, and I think it's a fascinating one. But I think what's interesting also to point out here is like the black line representing the gold price in Weimar marks, right? And obviously the Weimar mark hyperinflated, and so if you actually just look at the black line, um, it's yeah, I think it's something like we could probably expect to see in Bitcoin. But then when you look at the red line, the volatility aspect is crazy. But that's not necessarily because the volatility of gold is crazy. It's because the Weimar mark is getting hyperinflated, and so I think part of that also depends on what the strongest currencies in the world will do. Obviously, if things like the US dollar enter hyperinflation, we'll definitely see this as well. But I think that the important thing here is just like holding something that is sound money. And obviously, in the Bitcoiners, we believe that Bitcoin is digital gold. It's better than gold. And so I agree. I think volatility will continue to be a thing, but I think what's also fascinating, and some of the Bitcoiners that I've talked to is like, what is your unit of account? Like, because if your unit of account is Bitcoin, it can be pretty stable. You own the same amount of Bitcoin. It's usually the other side of the coin that's very volatile. It's the dollar amount that's, going up and down. And so yeah, I think as a Bitcoiner, what I try to do is I try to focus more on the Bitcoin I have and making sure that number goes up, and less focus a bit on the fiat currency part of the thing, if that makes sense.
That is an amazing thing because I only looked from like Bitcoin versus fiat, but in terms of hyper Bitcoinization, you also have to have a third metric, a third variable of that's maybe called purchasing power, and the volatility of Bitcoin will go down in terms of purchasing power, I think, but will go up in terms of volatility measured in fiat currencies if they get hyperinflated, and if the world actually goes towards Bitcoin. That's super interesting. I'm currently working like on a theory, on a conclusion of all the podcasts, and working on like, okay, how will this hyper Bitcoinization also look like? And that's like one part of what I'm currently working on in my book. And that's something I'm really interested in. And that's a really good point of like, looking volatility and diminishing returns from two perspectives. The one perspective is, the aspect of measuring it in a fiat currency, probably in the most dominant one. It makes sense to measure it in the US dollar, even though I'm living in the euro. And another form is like measure Bitcoin's growth maybe in gold, that to get more of the adoption, less of the volatility of the fiat currency. So I think gold might be an interesting comparison.
That could be interesting as well. I think for me, to be honest, the way that I view it is like the fiat side of things will fluctuate up and down a lot, but a lot of times that fiat fluctuation is not really reflective of Bitcoin's value. We all know that Bitcoin should be priced probably much higher than where it is right now. But because there's so many other things that are going on in the world and so many other things related to, fiat that we don't control, it goes up and down a lot. Things like the Federal Reserve and the interest rates that they put, that has a huge effect on the price of assets in general, but Bitcoin specifically. And so really my mindset is like, as a Bitcoiner, is like, what I want to focus on is like, how do I just get that Bitcoin number to be higher? And yeah, we still live in a fiat denominated world, right? You're not buying your groceries priced in Bitcoin, unfortunately. You're buying your groceries priced in euros or dollars. And so you still have to live in the fiat world. But I think that's the paradox right now, is like balancing, like, there's just like this really cool picture that I like. It's like basically an astronaut in a spacesuit sitting like in a forest. And I feel like that's how it sometimes is, like as a Bitcoiner. It's like you're already kind of in the future, but you're still stuck in the traditional world. And right now it's like, how do you balance those two things and how do you make sure that you can successfully live in both. But the real priority, at least for me, is how do I get that Bitcoin number to be higher at the end of the year.
That's a crazy thing to look at. Yeah, like getting the Bitcoin number higher. It's also something that I actually do now with my business of like, okay, how many dollars did I make in the year? Like I make it in euros, and how many Bitcoin did I make? And it will be probably really easy to hit the euro mark again, or like double that even maybe. Yeah. But can I also increase my Bitcoin income? That will be the fun question to ask at the end of the year. Really interesting. So I just pulled up the Bitcoin price in ounces and in grams of gold. I don't know why there's some difference. They swing differently. I don't have enough knowledge about the gold price. Why there's a different price of gold and in ounce and grams. But it's definitely interesting to see that a Bitcoin is way more stable here. It feels not as volatile in gold, and way more like smooth sailing from here, and less volatile. So if we compare that to the previous chart, or maybe like this is from 2010 to 2095, if you go now to Bitcoin in US dollar and you zoom out in the max, this looks a whole lot different. And this is not even from the starting, so it looks completely different from this one. It gets more and more flat actually, because the fiat volatility and the fiat devaluation is now out of the picture. That's super interesting. I never thought about that actually.
Yeah, exactly. It's super important what you're measuring Bitcoin against, because if you're measuring it against the fiat currency, that's and that's why we also see huge variations in which fiat currency you're measuring it against, right? If you look at the chart of like, okay, Bitcoin, US dollar, it looks something like that, but maybe now do like the Argentinian peso, it's probably a completely different chart, right? If you zoom out to the max, so it's like, it's hyperbolic. So that's the thing, like it's all about what you measure Bitcoin against. And that's why I think people should be focused on increasing the amount of Bitcoin that they have and worry less about the noise, about the price, especially. And that's what I tell all my friends and family as well, is like, look, if you're trying to trade Bitcoin, good luck. It could swing a million different ways. I wish you all the best. But my advice is like, hold it, have a long time horizon and study it. And then you'll be at peace, because it's very volatile, but I don't think it's volatile because Bitcoin is inherently volatile. I think it's volatile because we live in a fiat world that is volatile.
It's super interesting because my mom is so sweet. She always comes to me and says like, if you know a really good time to buy Bitcoin, like I know every time is a good time, but if you know like now is a really good time, like tell me. And I'm like, every time is a really good time for Bitcoin. Like I really don't know. There's actually many friends and family members that they come to me as like, hey Robin, like if like, as if I have some inside information, like they still think of Bitcoin of like there's like a community, and the people inside of the community have inside information the same way as people might have inside information of a company. But it is not like I have the same information of Bitcoin as anyone else. Like I don't like have special access to the blockchain and have like some special metrics that nobody else sees, obviously. So this thing of like people coming in and like, oh, like what is the best time to buy Bitcoin? And then I always tell them the same story. I was like, there are three things that I think will happen now. Either Bitcoin crashes down, it stays the same, or maybe it really goes up now. And I'm like, those three those three things are very likely that happens right now in the next 12 months. And then they're like, okay, let's see what happens.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing though, right? It's exactly like you said. Like I have no idea where Bitcoin goes in the next few months. The consensus right now is hopefully up and to the right, but it could also go down and to the right and to the left. You never know with Bitcoin. and that's why I think coming back on this education piece, it's so important. Like people look for the shortcut, right? People are always like, oh yeah, when is the best time to trade? Oh yeah, but like maybe this other coin that I heard about is also great, and maybe I should buy that. And then it's like people look for the shortcut to making wealth. But I think, and that's why I'm also a big fan of people like, well, despite their opinions on Bitcoin, you know, people like the late Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett, their fundamental investing principles are solid, and they're guys who basically they have this thing. It's like they're incredibly knowledgeable about what they invest in. Like they study their companies that they invest in, like to the T. They're also knowledgeable about the world at large, but then they also have the ability to just sit on their hands. And when the whole world is going crazy and people are trading up and down, they know the fundamental value of the companies that they own, and they just have the ability to be patient and outstick the market. And I think it's a great principle for Bitcoin as well, because you're not going to survive in Bitcoin, or you're not going to make any money in Bitcoin unless you truly understand what you own. You know, there's no shortcuts, and you may get lucky in the short term and step in at a good time and Bitcoin rips 30% to the upside. But, you know, like we just saw, it went up to 110K. Now it's at 95K. If you don't know what you own, you might already sell and you know, cut your losses or take the profit that you have. But we all know how valuable Bitcoin is. We all know over the long term where it's going to go, but you have to be willing to educate yourself. You have to be willing to study it and put in the work. And yeah, that's why I think Bitcoin is still priced where it is right now, is because most people haven't done that, and most people truly still don't understand what it is or why it's important.
And I also love the aspect of measuring Bitcoin in gold, because this puts the devaluation of the fiat currencies out of the equation, and we are just really focusing on the devaluation of gold a little bit. Like obviously, gold also gets devalued by Bitcoin, but at a very slow rate. And the most part of that chart is then just the adoption rate of Bitcoin, and nothing else. And then we can really measure of how much bigger Bitcoin got. So that's probably a way better way to think of the Bitcoin adoption rate compared in gold. Do you have a date of like when you expect Bitcoin to flip gold? Like that's I think the biggest event that will happen in terms of Bitcoin adoption milestones.
Yeah. A day, it's difficult. I think people are calling it for this cycle. I mean, the thing is, like, it's also dependent on what happens globally. You know, I know obviously now, especially in the past few months, there's been more talk about Bitcoin on a geopolitical scale as well. So the thing is, when you have a finite, scarce asset going up against infinite fiat money, yeah, it could run up really high depending on what the circumstances are. So the gold scenario, I believe right now to flip gold, we need to be at like 800K or something, which is about a 8x from where we are now, right? Which seems crazy, but with Bitcoin is like, say tomorrow, because I know the US has, you know, come forward and talk about like their digital assets policy and things like that. But let's say they actually make a meaningful move and do the Bitcoin strategic reserve and start adopting Bitcoin and actually stacking Bitcoin. And you see countries like China and Russia doing the same. And then the rest of the world kind of follows suit. It could happen this cycle. I mean, I'm not saying that it will, but I'm saying it's possible. So, maybe this cycle, but realistically, probably I would say in the next 4 to 5 years.
Absolutely, yeah, that's that could happen. Really cool. The one thing I'm curious also always with people are like how not how or why they got into Bitcoin, but why they are now so excited about Bitcoin that they even work inside of it, especially with you. You not only decided to dedicate your financial energy into Bitcoin, which is once you started, an easy step because you're like, that's the place I benefit the most and I have to put my financial energy somewhere. But like working in Bitcoin is a whole different level because I think Bitcoiners could make way more money in the fiat world with the same skills. I think Bitcoin ecosystem is still pretty early, so making money there is harder and not as easy as the money flows in the fiat system. That's why I'm always really interested in why someone is doing a Bitcoin podcast or a company in Bitcoin or some venture in Bitcoin or project in Bitcoin. Like, why are you also allocating your life's energy, like your time into Bitcoin?
Yeah, I mean, I think Bitcoin is the most important thing that we can work on right now, and that's why I think, I put my financial energy in there. But I think there's nothing else that gets me as excited to work on as Bitcoin. Doing these podcasts, after every podcast that I do, I'm always super energized because the people I talk with are just incredible. And so I do it because I genuinely love it, and because it's something that I'm passionate about. And I think I struggled for a while, kind of finding my quote unquote passion. And I've always been a very active guy, and I've loved sports and competing in sports and triathlons and things like that. And but I've never been to a point where I could be a professional athlete. And then when I discovered Bitcoin, I was able to almost like have that same enthusiasm for something, but then be able to apply it also in a business sense. And so for me, when I discovered Bitcoin, it just got me so excited because it was a technology that I think fundamentally fixes the world. They say fix the money, fix the world. And so for me, it's not even as much about the financial aspect of it anymore. It's about truly seeing the societal benefits that flow from mainstream Bitcoin adoption and people living on a Bitcoin standard and countries shifting to a Bitcoin standard. And so I think it's one of the most important and noble causes that we can work towards. And so I think that's a bit what life is about, right? It's also about working towards something that you believe in, working towards something that you're proud of. And for me, that's Bitcoin to the T.
It's also the bringing the ethics and the good things back to money, and what good that can bring to the world. It's almost charitable work, and it's super interesting. I rarely talk about that on the podcast, but Bitcoin is kind of the first revolution that if you're working in the revolution, you are massively rewarded financially. Like usually in a revolution, you are hunted and you are financially banned and financially devastated. But Bitcoin is kind of the opposite of that. Like you gain financial power by and participating in this revolution, because in the end of the day, if Bitcoin is actually successful, we will turn over central banks and the elites of the world in banking. Like that's a huge thing. It's like the French Revolution. It's like other revolutions where a smaller group of people are starting to revolute against the big elites, the big overpowers, and that's usually not rewarded financially.
Yeah, it's true, and I think that's one of the unique things about Bitcoin as well. It's life is all about incentives, and I think obviously a beautiful incentive about Bitcoin is like, and I believe Alex Gladstein also talks about this a lot because he works obviously with the Human Rights Foundation, and so he deals with a lot of oppressive regimes and things like that. And I think one of the things that's beautiful about Bitcoin is like the incentives are there, where it's like you can be incentivized from like a goodwill perspective to advocate for Bitcoin, to advocate for all of the fundamental benefits that it purveys to society. But you also get financially rewarded, because if Bitcoin gets adopted, if Bitcoin goes up in value, you also, I assume if you own Bitcoin, you also then, get a part of that. And so that's why I think it's also exciting to work in Bitcoin, is because, it's something I'm passionate about for what it represents, and the fundamental ability that it has to really shape society for the better. But Bitcoin's success is also my success, because I'm pretty much all in on Bitcoin. If Bitcoin does well, I do well. So that's what's one of the beautiful things about Bitcoin, is it really combines these incentive systems. And that's why I think, like, as it gains an adoption and we see countries adopting it, companies adopting it, more individuals adopting it, it will be like a self-fulfilling prophecy, because everybody will have a financial interest in it. They will also want to see it succeed and push it forward.
Absolutely. And one thing that just came to my mind while you was talking, you said about you also benefit financially from it. So there are not only people in here that do it for the good and the better of society. There are also people in here that just do it for the financial sake of it. And it's maybe an unpopular opinion, but I think there are a lot of bad people also in Bitcoin. There are some, like, most people in Bitcoin are extremely kind. And I hope my podcast kind of shows that side of Bitcoin, because I will not record with bad or like bad attitude people or like negative people. I try to only record with the good. And if I saw after publishing someone is like, I published the wrong one, I don't delete it, but I just don't make a second one. So I try to over time filter that out. But there are definitely some bad apples in Bitcoin. Like it's not all amazing. They are not all kind and loving and caring. There are some assholes in here. So it's probably Bitcoin has a higher quote than usual of like really kind, loving, and caring personalities that really try to move the world a little bit forward. But it's not all of them.
Yeah. No, it's, you'll have that in any system, right? You'll have people who, I know a lot of people, and especially it happens with every bull cycle, that you have people who had probably no idea what Bitcoin was a month ago, and then the price rockets up and now they're a Bitcoin expert. And it's like, no, you're just probably a scammer that's trying to trick innocent people into thinking you know what Bitcoin is. And unfortunately you have that in any system, but I think Bitcoin does have a good way of also filtering the bad from the good. And I think over time it becomes, it's, what is it, the saying? It's like, when the tide goes up, you see you swimming naked, or something like that. So I think in Bitcoin, it's the same. Like, you have scammers in every system, but I think the true colors show over time. And I try to focus, like yourself, on the ones who do have a positive impact and who are actually fundamentally trying to help Bitcoin for the better.
What is it saying? When the tide goes up?
Yeah, it's like when the tide goes down, you see you swimming naked, or something like that. It's like something along those lines.
Oh man, I want to find that. I want to find that. Let me see if I. Only when the tide goes out to you discover. Oh, it's a Warren Buffett quote. Even I will share that.
Exactly.
You're a Warren Buffett fan, I can imagine.
I mean, yeah, I'm a big fan of his. Obviously he has his controversial opinions on Bitcoin, and I think, to be honest, it's because he's not studied it enough. And I think from a technology, I think Warren Buffett is not a technologist. Warren Buffett is an investor, and if you look at his company and his portfolio, he's not well acclaimed for having huge technological brands. He's more acclaimed for having companies like Coca-Cola, like consumer good brands. And but he's a genius, and I mean, what he's able to have done, and I think also he truly embodies a lot of the principles of Bitcoin. He's someone who is incredibly humble, who is, even though he's a billionaire, he still lives in his same. There's a documentary actually on Warren Buffett that's super fascinating, but someone who lives very humbly, who loves what he does, who is immensely curious. He reads most of his days, and who's just a happy guy, like whenever you see him, and especially, well, before Charlie Munger passed, the two of them together, it's an inspiration. I want to be like that when I'm 90 years old. And so despite his controversial opinion on Bitcoin, I think he's a real example for a lot of people. And yeah, that saying, only when the tide goes out do you discover who's been swimming naked, I think is great and applies to a lot of aspects of life.
I love that so much. Only when the tide goes out do you discover who's been swimming naked. I will use that quote a lot. I think that's a great one, because there's a lot there's a lot of that, and I'm a swimmer, so I naturally like swimming quotes or like that.
There you go, new quote for your repertoire.
I love that. Yeah, really, really cool. But yeah, I do think I think if Warren Buffett was right now 35 or 40 years old, I think he would be a Bitcoin maxi, to be honest. Like, I think he's just he has no incentive to study Bitcoin, and from his point of view, I think he's just not ready to receive it, and he probably will never be. Like, how old is he? Like 90 something.
Yeah, 90s,
I don't know. Like, if he ever will get Bitcoin, like the chances are really low. Let him have his peace in his retirement age, and it's okay for me if he's not a Bitcoiner. Like, he can. A lot of people also make the argument of like he's a danger and a threat to Bitcoin because he owns the banks and stuff like that. Like, no, let him have his life. Like, yes, he benefited from the fiat system, obviously, from the money printing, but he's a great investor, and in his fundamental thesis of like. Betting on the farm long term, and like how to pick great stocks and sticking with those stocks and don't diversify. He's a big proponent of focusing and not diversifying. So I do like his philosophy a lot, and let's give him a break for not getting Bitcoin.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing, right? Like, he's towards the end of his career. And he's had an incredible career, something to be incredibly proud of. And I think Berkshire Hathaway, will see how they adapt to the coming times. But I think the world that he lived in when he started Berkshire Hathaway is a lot different from the world we're in now. And I'm not saying he doesn't understand the world now, but I know he doesn't understand Bitcoin at the moment. And that's okay. I don't think we need everybody to be a Bitcoin maxi. I think the people who understand it and embrace it will be the ones that benefit going forward. But yeah, he's towards the end of his career. He's lived life that's something to be incredibly proud of. And so, like you said, I think we don't need to force Bitcoin upon him unless he comes to it himself. And if not, we'll see if whoever ends up taking over Berkshire, if they end up adopting Bitcoin. But again, they're in a different sector, like even though they're investors, I see that they're much more, I don't see Berkshire Hathaway as a technology company. I see them more as like they're investing in companies like Coca-Cola and, like consumer brands that doesn't really have a relation to Bitcoin. So yeah, the people who get Bitcoin will be the ones who profit in the future. And Warren's had a great career, and I wish him nothing but the best. But yeah, unfortunately, he's not on the Bitcoin wagon at the moment.
Yeah, and I think it would be huge for him to move on to Bitcoin. Like, honestly, that would be like the small cherry on top of his life, of like getting Bitcoin at the end of his career after attacking it. That would be massive for his biographies, massive for his legacy. But I don't have a lot of hope for that, and I'm okay with that. Do you think that Michael Saylor might be the current Warren Buffett? I mean, Michael Saylor is, I think, like 30 years younger than Warren Buffett.
I think so, to be honest, because especially the way that they are positioning MicroStrategy at the moment. They just did the whole brand change with strategy and everything. The thing that's unique about Michael Saylor is he's the CEO and founder of a technology company. So I think it's different from Warren because he didn't go into just create like a firm. But I think what's very obvious about Michael Saylor is he's an incredibly knowledgeable person, someone who studied history. He's done these incredible, I think with Robert Breedlove, I believe he's done these like incredibly in-depth shows of like what is money and going through history and things like that, where he has so much knowledge. And a lot of times that's why he's also so popular in Bitcoin, I think, is because he has a way of like distilling those concepts to make it easy to understand and to apply to Bitcoin and to emphasize why Bitcoin is so important. And I think he will be seen indeed as like equivalent to Warren Buffett, especially as Bitcoin reaches the levels that we will all expect it to be. But he's also very young into Bitcoin, right? He's also been into Bitcoin, or very young. He's relatively young into Bitcoin. I think he entered in the last cycle. So I think he's also, it's not like he's in his 30s, so we'll see towards the end of his career where Bitcoin will be. But I think from a knowledge perspective, I think from a thesis perspective, he'll be right up to par with Warren Buffett in the long run.
Yeah, like his way of explaining Bitcoin is just unmatched, and I'm fascinated of like where he goes with the explanations. I think it's really, really cool to see. But yeah, like he's like, he's not in his 30s, but like he's still like a good times younger than Warren Buffett.
Yeah,
Against Warren Buffett, he seems young.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's definitely true. He's also not young. And yeah, he has been in Bitcoin. I think 2020 is his entry year. I remember that good because it's also my entry year. I think I have been like I think a month before Saylor. Like he was really fundamental for my orange billing when he came on to all the podcasts and stuff like that. Where this is where I was really forming all the thoughts. So a month before he really publicly came out, like I came in and I was like, oh, like this guy really spoke to me, and it was really fundamental to my understanding of it. One last topic I want to get into podcast is the whole nation state and Trump thing that you are currently witnessing, and where in the cycle, like we talked before a little bit of like where we go and how the adoption might go, but where are we right now? What do you think about the current markets?
Yeah. I think right now where we are in terms of like nation state adoption is pretty similar to where we were maybe around this time last year with like the ETF adoption. Because I remember when the ETF got approved, it was kind of like a bit of like you had the approval and then the price kind of lagged for a bit and then it shot up. And I think similarly now, like we had Trump who was voted into office, and then obviously the price kind of rallied on his inauguration and the news that he was elected. And now for the past few weeks, we've been in a bit of a lull. But I think I do expect that the US will adopt a strategic Bitcoin reserve. I don't see it just from a game theory perspective. They almost have to. And I think Trump does have smart people in his ear. And we saw CEO of Cantor Fitzgerald, Howard Lutnick. He was also appointed, I forget what the exact position was, but essentially one of the heads that's responsible for, this digital assets movement or bill or whatever you want to call it that they have. So, and he's also a huge Bitcoiner. He did an interview with Anthony Pompliano a few months ago where he was essentially one of the biggest Bitcoin bulls that I've seen, and the fact that he's heading up this unit is incredibly bullish news. And so I think it's a bit of a lagging indicator right now. I think people are still like waiting for a move to happen with the US where they will officially announce like an acquisition of Bitcoin. But I think once that happens, I do think it could be quite a significant event. And I do think other countries will follow suit as well. And yeah, from a price perspective, right now we're sitting at 100K. But we saw that 35% swing when Trump was approved. And so I think once we start to get more true initiative from the US in terms of like, okay, now this is our plan, this is how much Bitcoin we're going to acquire, I think the second leg of this bull run will start. And I think it depends also on the other nation states. If Russia and China decide to follow suit, I would say the race is on, but who knows? It could also go the opposite way. We could also have Trump saying, oh, I'm going to hold off on that, or maybe, focus on the other coins and the shit coins of the world. So you never know with politicians. So you have to remain skeptical. You have to remain diligent. But over the long run, it's all irrelevant. Bitcoin will just trend higher and higher.
Yeah, it's like really... You're gonna get into the field of talking about Bitcoin every day, and you're like, this is happening, this is happening, and then you're kind of zooming out of doesn't matter. It is good. I think we have a responsibility to orange pill people and to talk about Bitcoin and shape the narrative and educate people. But the news are really just for entertaining reasons. That's why I still don't have a news channel. That's why I don't have anything related to news. I might do it in the future because maybe it adds value to the community. But I'm more interested in having conversations and figuring out how people think about Bitcoin and what they do with Bitcoin. So I don't know, maybe news have a different kind of news in stock magazine are really important. You want to know what's happening with your management team and with your stock. You want to know what's happening with your crypto, how fast it's going down. But with Bitcoin, it's kind of irrelevant. It will do its thing. It's a protocol. Who subscribed to a TCP/IP newsletter? Who cares?
That's the thing, and that's what I like the comparison that you just made of Bitcoin to the internet. Maybe when the internet was starting off, people were like, "Oh, I'm not sure if it's like." You have famous clips of Bill Gates going on to talk shows and talking about email and things like that, and people laughing at his face, and it's the same thing with Bitcoin. A lot of people kind of laugh and at your face when you talk about it. Maybe less and less now, but the adoption is going to come. It's like a force that you can't stop. It's similar to AI. It's going to come whether we like it or not, whether people want it to or not. But Bitcoin it's a force that's been introduced into the world. A miracle that Satoshi was able to do it in the circumstances that he did. And I think it's almost I tell people also it's, for me, the Bitcoin creation is almost like a divine conception of sorts. It's just this thing that was cast down on us. We have this perfect money created at the perfect time, was able to grow to a point where now it's essentially unstoppable. And so just sit back, relax, study, read some Bitcoin books, turn off the news, and over time you'll be happy that you did and that you just kept a level head. And so it's like the internet. The adoption is going to come. And it'll be volatile. It'll go up and down. But for me, it's a matter of when, not if. And I think that's all you really have to focus on.
Yeah, absolutely. It will come anyways. Really cool. I have one question to ask each and every one of my guests. The question is what can we learn from you besides Bitcoin?
I like that question. One thing I'm super passionate about is sports, and right now I'm actually training for an Ironman in Austria, in Klagenfurt, and that's another area of my life where I'm super passionate about because I like to push myself physically as well, and so I think a lesson that I have for people is push yourself out of your comfort zones, challenge yourselves to do difficult things. It doesn't have to be an Ironman, but find things that you want to do, challenge yourself to do them, whether that's learning a language, whether that's learning a new sport. There could be a bunch of different things, but there's so many opportunities in this world, and you only have one life, and life is beautiful. And, you really have to just be willing to take risks, push yourself out of your comfort zone. And that's why for me, this Ironman and training and sports in general is just a big area of my life where I try to on a daily basis just push myself and keep both my physical and my mental being intact.
Oh, I love that. Klagenfurt, so you're in Austria.
I'll be in Austria, in June.
I love June that. 15th. Really cool. You are in where are you based usually?
In Spain.
Ah, okay, nice. Like if you come to Vienna, let me know. Like we'll go for coffee.
Definitely, yeah. I'll definitely hit you up if I'm in
Vienna. In June, there is also the Bitcoin Prague event. By the way, for everyone that is listening, get your tickets. Bitcoin Prague, 10% discount with code Robin. This is the coolest, biggest Bitcoin conference I personally like inside of Europe. I mean, there's also like Bitcoin Amsterdam. It's really cool also to go there. There's also Madeira, which is also really cool. But maybe I'm biased because Bitcoin Prague is so close to my place that I like it the most. But yeah, Bitcoin Prague, get your tickets, 10% off with code Robin. Definitely come there. And I think it's like 19th of June. Are you?
Yeah, it's the weekend afterwards, I believe. I'm trying to come to Bitcoin Prague. Right now, I'm trying to work out my schedule and everything because there might be a family holiday after the Ironman. So trying to figure everything out, but it's my objective to go to Bitcoin Prague because it's one of the biggest ones in Europe, and a lot of times you kind of like that SpongeBob meme where you're like looking outside of the window, looking down onto like the streets. That's how I feel sometimes with like the US ones because they're quite far from here. But yeah, Bitcoin Prague is definitely on my radar, so I'll try to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. I will also be in Vegas because it's just an event I think I have to be.
Yeah.
But I'm more excited that I don't know if I'm more. I think I'm maybe even more excited about Vegas because it's a new experience for me.
Yeah.
But it's a whole different kind of a conference for Vegas. By the way, you can also get the tickets there with 10% discount with code Robin. It's actually funny because I start talking about this code Robin thing, and it's like, it's hard to figure out where you don't get code Robin these days. Like I have so many connections now with the people there. I always try to get like at least the code, and then I'm sometimes surprised of like I don't even promote that product, but because of the code and people are used to code Robin, they just use it and they're like, oh, like it works, and then it gets.
So that's the key here. Just use code Robin on any Bitcoin product or site and see if it works. I want to use that
like
myself now.
If you buy anything in Bitcoin, like use code Robin.
Just try it. Yeah.
Try it out. Yeah. Sorry for that shameless plug. Thank you so much, man, for being on the show. We have an end routine, as you know, where the previous guest is asking a question for you without knowing who you really are. And the question from a previous guest is, what does freedom mean to you?
Yeah, that's a good one. Freedom is very important to me. And what freedom means to me is being able to do what you want whenever you want. Having control over your time, I think, is the most important thing, because having control of your time allows you to use that in the way that you want to use it. And a big byproduct of that is having control of your money. That's also why Bitcoin is so important. But yeah, for me, freedom is really being able to do what you want when you want. And I think that's something that, we should all strive to be able to do.
100%. It's so beautiful. Really cool. Then, yeah, thank you so much, Stephan, for being on the show. I love to see it. And where can people find you, ask your questions, reach out to you before I let you go?
Yeah, definitely. So people can find me on Twitter at Stephan, I believe it's Stephan_Zim. But I don't know if you have show notes or anything. Maybe you could put it in there. Otherwise, yeah, I'm sure if you see this pop up on Robin's feed, he'll tag me. So feel free to shoot me a message. And yeah, if you want to take a listen to my podcast as well, the Bitcoin Journeys podcast, you can find it wherever podcasts typically are. So that's my shameless plug there. But yeah, happy to connect. And if you're also interested listening to this and interested on coming to my show, I'm also always looking to interview Bitcoiners like Robin, who I also had on my show. So yeah, happy to connect and talk.
Really cool. Thank you so much, Stephan, for being on. Also, thank you so much for everyone that is watching and listening, for joining us today. As always, I'll be back tomorrow with another episode. Bye-bye.